Farmers made good planting progress in the week ending May 13th in all but the northern Midwest. So planting pace on corn is nearly back to normal nationally, ahead on beans and only lagging slightly on spring wheat. U.S. farmers planted another quarter of the corn crop in the week and are caught up to the 63% average. Nebraska is slightly ahead, while Iowa and North Dakota are near normal. Minnesota is still lagging 25%, with South Dakota behind 40%. U.S. soybean planting progress jumped ahead of normal at 35%, and that trend follows in Nebraska, with the rest of the region slightly behind. And farmers planted another quarter of the spring wheat crop in the week ending May 13th, just slightly behind the average pace. South Dakota farmers are 80% done, while Minnesota and North Dakota have caught up to the 5-year averages. And winter wheat conditions improved 2% nationally, 5% in South Dakota, and 3% in Nebraska. Joining us today with a look at crop progress and other market issues and market analysis is Randy Martinson with Martinson Ag in Fargo. Randy, let's talk a little bit about the grain market in terms of the spring rally that we saw. Really, it was kind of tied to South American weather. So that was the first weather thing that the market was focused in on, right?
It was, and primarily Argentina. Again, just like we saw a couple years ago, Argentina is pretty big in soybean production and for the most part more on the meal side. And that's really where our strength came from. And the meal ran the market again early this spring, started to cause a little concerns with the drought situation that took place in Argentina and the expectation that U.S. meal demand was going to pick up quite large. And that's really helped to push this market, and it's spilled over even into our growing season now.
All right, so let's talk about that transition now, away from South American weather focus, a little bit more to U.S. weather focus. And we were started off with the planting season a little bit bumpy, but now it doesn't look like planting progress is really much of a concern to the market.
You know, it's really not, and it's tough because we can plant so much of a crop in such a quick period of time up here in the Northern Plains, well, in the U.S. in general. I think we were getting 25 to 30% planted in a week, especially when you look at the Corn Belt side. And we've had decent weather for planting in a majority of the U.S., so it's not such a big issue at this point.
Okay, but when you look at the northern tier of states, the market is already thinking that we may see a shift from some corn acres here into soybeans, and we're starting to trade that even with some corn-soybean spreads, aren't we?
We are, and the part of that is because of how wet it is, and especially southern Minnesota and also into eastern South Dakota, where we really don't have a lot of progress, and probably no progress at all in some of those areas. A lot of that, we'll see some more soybeans in that area, and also up here in the Northern Plains, we've seen a little concerns with availability of fertilizer. Some of those guys are going to be switching some of those acres over as well to soybeans. So yeah, we're going to see that some switching. Just how much, we're not quite sure yet.
All right, what about spring wheat? Because we're past May 15th. That's usually a psychological time where we have a cutoff and guys start to switch over to other crops. What do you anticipate we're going to see for switches?
I expect we'll probably see 250,000, maybe 500,000 acres switch over to spring wheat, mainly because, like you said, a lot of guys don't want to plant the spring wheat after the 15th because of yield kind of drops a little bit after that time frame. Some will switch to corn if they do have the fields fertilized, but a lot more towards beans. And beans have held up decent and still given a good return.
All right, so let's also talk about the funds because they're pretty much long in most of the grains. And as we move into the time when we have a weather market, are they going to defend those longs?
You know, I think they will. And part of it, we saw some of that here this week even, especially in the Minneapolis market, where a little dry concerns have brought the funds back in buying again. We did see it in corn as well this week. Soybeans, not so much, as we started to see maybe a little too good of planting conditions and a little bit ahead of pace for planting concerns. So pulled a little bit out of the bean market, but overall, once we get into later June, early July, they're going to be defending those positions.
All right, and let's just talk quickly about cattle. We've had this big disconnect between futures and cash. Cash is starting to come down, but we also have futures going down as well. Are we going to test those spike lows, and is this wall of cattle really coming?
I've been one that not thinking that wall is coming. I think our early winter or late winter, early spring weather leveled things off, and we saw poorer performance in the feedlots. I don't think the cattle are going to be there, but yet the funds and the selling just seems to be too great in that market to overcome. Technically, we're not looking very good. Fundamentally, we've got positive news to look at. I mean, we've got lighter slaughter weights. The slaughter numbers aren't there. So I do think that we'll start to see a little stability in that market. It's just going to be a while.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Randy Martinson with Martinson Ag here in Fargo, North Dakota.